We'll take a breath. Every time I ask you a question, Dennis, it's like taking a drink out of a fire hydrant. Dr. Dennis Cuddy is with us, former Senior Associate, U.S. Department of Education, and also instructed in at almost all levels, high school and college levels, author of many books, including Conspiracy and The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan. And we shall return. We're at steelonsteel.com. I'm John Leffler. The program is Steel on Steel. You know, it's one thing when you talk about globalism, meaning we're going to have global trade and we'll come up with a set of rules by which that can happen and make it fair to everybody. Although, notice that the Paris Accord, about which so many people are screaming that it's the end of the planet, number one, would have done so very, very little to curb anything in the way of anthropogenic global warming. And number two was essentially a wealth transfer mechanism by which more wealth from first world countries would be transmitted to third world countries with questionable results. And so pulling out of a bad treaty, even if global warming is a problem, is the thing to do, you know. The wrong thing done to a problem is oftentimes worse than nothing being done. Welcome back to Steel on Steel. John Leffler here with you. But the whole issue is, as we looked at how the globalist move went, it was a dialectic idea whereby we could have bits of socialism, bits of capitalism, and gradually slide all the countries of the world into some kind of a global governance, which they would call our global government, by doing it in regional sections at first. And notice that we're just starting to see the calls in Europe now for some kind of a united European republic. At least it was thrown on the table in one op-ed piece, which means people are thinking about it. So anyway, back to Dr. Dennis Cuddy, our guest right now, author of Conspiracy and also The Power Elite and the Secret Nazi Plan, among other books, talking about how the global elites work in all of their behind-the-scenes manipulating to get us in various places. And to recap it here, we're an amalgam, bits of socialism, bits of capitalism, throw it all together and make it work.
When we were a country, the origin of the country, we were capitalists, so these people created Karl Marx as the antithesis to the thesis, created communism, and then the synthesis, of course, would be socialism, and each nation has to become socialist before you can have the world socialist government. That's what the word Nazi means, National Socialism, so they created Hitler. And they get us into wars, no-win wars. All of these things are created and managed, and they have, I mean, it's long, long in advance. You have Valerie Jarrett being planned way in advance. Her father was a physician, African-American, who went to Iran. She was born there. She speaks Farsi. She came back into Chicago, and this young fellow, Barack Obama, is just starting out. And so she got Michelle Obama, her high-paying, not too much work job, so they have some income. And then she winds up, Valerie Jarrett, becoming his prime advisor in the White House and joining up, you know, with Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn and George Soros' funding and so forth. And Clinton, Bill Clinton, too. They had this young fellow from Arkansas go to Georgetown. Why Georgetown? Because that's where Carroll Quigley was, who loved the Power Elite, the Secret Society elect, and Avery Dulles, John Foster Dulles' son, as a colonel there. They wanted him there so they could get him to be a Rhodes Scholar and so forth. They look at people way in advance, even maybe when they're in high school. And so a lot of this with Brzezinski, who just passed away, same thing. Way in advance, they have things planned out and plotted, and they put people, not just in this country, they got Saddam Hussein, his first assignment, he botched up. It was to assassinate the prime minister of Iraq so they could get old Saddam in there. The CIA protected him, but, you know, that was it. Gaddafi, same thing. They wanted a young hotshot guy into Libya, so they, you know, greased the skids so he could get there. And so these global people, in fact, L. Fletcher Prouty was the operations officer for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he wrote a book about JFK and Vietnam and some other books where he admitted this. Now, this isn't just some conspiracy theorist. This is a guy on the inside who was in charge of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Special Operations, and he says there's this group of people. They're very powerful. They have the same information as the CIA does, the National Security Administration. They have the same documents, but they're not in the government. But this other group, this outside group, has all of that information, and he says they literally make and break empires around the world. So this is far more than just some conspiracy theory. I try to document, you know, who's doing what, when, where, and so forth over the years, so it doesn't just seem to be a wild theory.
Now, if we had to look at, what was the date that Alice Bailey was talking about?
She said by 2025, the World Federation of Nations will be taking rapid shape. And I think that part of that will be a Democrat female in the presidency.
Okay, what will the next between now and then, what do you think will look like as we look at the world changes? I always think this whole Donald Trump thing is a blip, a bump is a better word, in
right.
the general movement. Okay, so what will it look like when we get to this world confederacy she was talking about?
Well, the World Federation of Nations, and that's an important distinction, rather than confederacy. A federation means you have to do what the world government says. The confederacy is a sort of a loose alliance of voluntary stuff. So it'll be a federation of nations, and that's why it was important. I put in one of my books a letter signed by Bill Clinton on White House stationery. He was writing to the World Federalist Society supporting a world government, which would be a federal world government, which you're not supposed to do if you've taken an oath to defend the Constitution. So what happens is, certain events, certain crises, certain terrorist attacks, global economic crisis occurs by next year that shapes the midterm elections. You will probably find the Republicans actually losing some seats. Donald Trump is going to, put a good face on things. He'll try, as best he can, but I'm afraid he won't be successful. So it's a bump in the road. And importantly for the power lead isn't just what Trump does or if he messes up. The important point for the power lead is they like to control people. So they might like to, let's say, blackmail a young John Foster Dulles or whatever. Or they might have some knowledge of Bill Clinton taking drugs or something or whatever. So what they do on the global scale, or what the president is, they'll create a situation where the individual seems discredited. And what happens then is the public in general will start saying, well, who gave us this guy? Who gave us this fellow who didn't follow through on his promises like he said he was going to do? He might have tried, and maybe his intentions were well, but he wasn't saying, who gave us this guy? And so the finger pointing will start next year or so, and everybody will say, oh, it's those Tea Party types. It's those Christian conservative types who gave them to us, so let's don't pay attention to them anymore. And that happens globally. Like in Israel, for example, they'll look at the Orthodox Jews and say, well, look at them. They're recalcitrants. They're willing to only have what they want. They're not willing to compromise for peace. So let's ostracize them. Let's, keep them out. Don't elect them. Don't pay attention to them. So part of this whole scenario is to have the public in general not listen to the conservative or Tea Party or conservative Christian types anymore. They want to discredit them. So whatever problems arise that Trump is unable to solve, those people, the Christian conservative Tea Party types, will be blamed for that. So those people gave us this person who didn't fulfill his promises and so forth. And so that's the way the power will shift. It'll shift backwards. And the goal will obviously be to pick up on the millennials already supporting Bernie Sanders so that they will be more inclined to elect somebody, perhaps a woman with socialist leanings. She won't be an outright socialist, but socialist leanings. And that'll be important because if that World Federation of Nations is taking rapid shape, according to Alice Bailey, by 2025, you're going to have to make some move in that direction. Now, Obama was the first move. When you start taking over General Motors and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you're moving in that direction. It's like a back and forth, like a pendulum. The political body politic sort of swings to the left and to the right and to the left. So you had a swing with Obama towards socialism, then you have a reaction to that with Trump, and then if Trump doesn't do so well, you'll have another swing towards socialism, and that's the way they'll move gradually, step by step by step, toward the World Federation of Nations in 2025, beginning then, which will be socialist in leaning. But it also is going to be a world religion. So that's why it's not just a world economy, world government. They're going to have this world religion. And so through crises that will evolve, they will say, can't we all just get along, like Rodney King said? And so what they'll start to do is emphasize, and the new Democrat female president will be like that. She won't say, that she's a particular, she won't say, I'm a New Ager, but she'll start to say, well, let's see what we all have in common. What do Muslims and Hindus and Christians and Jews, what do we all have in common? And so it will wind up being sort of mishmash that G.K. Chesterton warned about. He said this almost happened 2,000 years ago when the Christians were invited to put up a statue of Jesus next to Mithra and all these other gods and goddesses. And he said the Christians refused. He said, had they done that, we would be in this like lukewarm mess no real belief in anything, especially in Christianity. So that's one of the things that you have to guard against. And that's one thing that the planners like Brock Chisholm was going for. We have to get rid of this concept of right and wrong and so forth. That's all, no-fault divorce. All of this is leading that direction. Movies, TV shows, laughing at various sexual immoralities, that's all tended to numb the conscience. Like the Bible said, their consciences will be seared and so forth. And so it's a multifaceted front we're moving on. And so that's what will happen over the next 8 years.
Should be interesting. Anyway, Dennis, anything you'd like to promote? Dr. Dennis Cuddy, or should we call you the historian in residence?
The historian in residence. Well, I'd like to promote my books. The latest one is Conspiracy. I also have another one in print called Power Lead and the Secret Nazi Plan. And if any of you are inclined, my mother's had a difficult time, and I've set up a GoFundMe page for her and her health expenses. If you care to look at that and type in my name.
Is it under your name or Peggy's name?
Either one. Either one. If you type my name or her name, it'll come up.
Yeah, Dr. Dennis Cuddy's mother, Peggy, had a lot of medical expenses. She's 93 now. She turned 93 this year. So they do have a GoFundMe account if you'd like to help them throw in a contribution to that. The last name is spelled Cuddy, C-U-D-D-Y. Coming up in the next